What is up, Slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and when I was looking at topics for this week, I had a couple of different ideas because I have a list of topics that I can go through and kind of decide, okay, I can do this, I can do that. And one of the things that I was thinking about was MTV, because one of the things that I talked about last week when I was going through the different Gen X tropes is it talked about how Gen Xers want music on their MTV. And it just got me thinking about the days of music television, the earliest videos, but also some of the cultural phenomena that came out of that. So I began thinking about a particular music video which gave birth to this episode, and that is Thriller by Michael Jackson. The Thriller video was about as groundbreaking as you could imagine. So for anyone who doesn't know, the video for Thriller, so you already had this huge phenomenon of a record, but the music video was directed by John Landis, a major Hollywood director. So this was something that was new, where you're actually seeing a major player in Hollywood reducing themselves, if you will, to a short format that's a music video. However, I think it goes to show just the drawing power of Michael Jackson, that he could get a director like John Landis to create something. And they ended up collaborating on a number of different projects, including Michael's Captain EO project, which was a Disney exclusive. But I just started thinking about Michael and how my dad, the rock guy, was super enthusiastic about that video. And in part because Michael Jackson was already famous for 20 years at this point, and still a very young man in his 20s. Well, actually, I guess at this point he's probably in his 30s, but nevertheless, he's still very, very young in the business, and he has a whole career ahead of him. So I really decided, okay, we're going to talk about Michael Jackson, because his story in and of itself is quite amazing. I guess in part because of how tragic it was. Whenever you have an artist of that stature, I think it's almost a given that there's something behind it or driving it that is from a very deep place. I don't think any great art is created without pain. I'm sure there are artists out there who are super positive all the time that break this mold. I'm certain of it. People who don't have a care in the world, and kudos to them. But Michael Jackson was a very troubled soul. So Michael Joseph Jackson. So Joseph is his middle name, is the name of his father, Joe, which of course they had a challenging relationship. But Michael was born August 29th, 1958. And he is described as a singer, songwriter, dancer, and philanthropist. And he was dubbed the King of Pop. So this is where I was mentioning my dad. So when Thriller came out in 1982 was the record, and then December 2nd, 1983, Friday, December 2nd. So I had visitation with my dad on Wednesdays and alternating weekends. So December 2nd, 1983, I was with my dad. And that's when the music video for Thriller came out. But what got me thinking was, he's not a pop fan. Like, he's a rock guy. Like, my dad listened to Skynyrd and The Doors and Sabbath and Zeppelin and the Beatles and the Stones, that kind of stuff. Very rarely did he listen to contemporary music. Now, contemporary, bands like the Cars kind of bridge that gap between, 70s and 80s. They became bigger in the 80s. And I do believe that he really was enthusiastic about Appetite for Destruction, that first Guns N' Roses record. However, being that he was born in 1955, my dad's music would have been formed by things that were on the Ed Sullivan Show or the various variety shows. So by the time we got to Thriller, the reason that I think my dad was so fascinated by it was he was also a movie buff. And you have this John Landis connection, but he would have listened to Michael as part of the Jackson 5. So my mom and my dad, but my mom in particular, so obviously they were, dating in their teens, had all the Jackson 5 45s. They were a huge force. So it's interesting how it kind of bridged the gap generationally, where he's like, oh man, I've been listening to Michael Jackson since he was a kid. And that was like a very real thing. And just as an aside, you did have some royal families of entertainment. So not just the Jacksons, you also had the Osmonds, and then one that kind of gets forgotten, and I just remember this very clearly as a kid, the Mandrell sisters. So there were these families that were very, very popular due to television exposure. So that relationship between TV and music has been in place pretty much forever. Everyone talks about the Beatles first, being on the Ed Sullivan Show and how that changed everything. Or how when Elvis was on TV, this was scandalous because of the way that he danced. And you could only go ahead and record him from the waist up because all those gyrations that he was doing was taboo at the time, things that you couldn't do on TV. And if you go back and you think about it, Lucy and Ricky Ricardo couldn't share a bed even though they were a married couple. So you couldn't film them in the same bed on TV, so they had the two single beds. Little bit of a diversion into early television. So getting back into Michael Jackson. So Michael made his professional debut. Yeah, so it was 20 years. So in 1964. In 1964, he made his debut with his older brothers, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, and Marlon, as members of the Jackson 5, later known as the Jacksons, when they did that big reunion tour. And I mean, if you think about the Jackson 5, their discography and their number of singles. So they signed to Motown where they were the first group to debut with 4 consecutive #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 chart with the songs I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There. I mean, come on. And they're all literally just kids. And then, they had their solo records, and then they did that victory tour where they all came back together. But if you think about it, 1964, they first debut, and they had been in the public eye from just the onset of childhood and the kind of trials and tribulations. And anyone who's either read about the family, watched the miniseries, which was fantastic, that delved into their background, this was one of those scenarios where they talk about the soccer moms or the stage moms, the dance moms, right? That's become kind of a theme. And gosh, there's been a ton of reality shows about this, right? Can you imagine the reality show that would have gone on behind the scenes here? Because Joe Jackson was driving this ship. Excuse me. And working his kids exceptionally hard because at this point, they became a commodity. They became an asset. And the more successful the boys were, the more successful the family was. And it's like any scenario, like when you become the breadwinner for your family, that becomes a burden that you carry. Now, not a bad burden if you're an adult like myself who has a family. I'm supposed to, do my part to provide. but the kids were the ones providing. And if they missed a note, if they missed a dance move, if they did one thing wrong, they were punished for it. Now, I don't think, in 2022, we can say allegedly. I think there was enough firsthand accounts that this was an incredibly abusive situation. Now, I'm sure, like anything else with family dynamics, there was a certain amount of, I don't know, how do you put it? You've achieved this amazing amount of fame and success, and all of that is positive. Yet behind the scenes, you have all this pain. So as I'm talking about the pain that goes behind artistry, all of this became, I think, a driving force for the whole family, and most specifically, Michael throughout his life. Because how could it not? A, you're in the public eye, and then behind the scenes, you're in a very challenging environment, one where abuse is prevalent. Nevertheless, the Jacksons had Jackson mania. Jackson mania. Let's see, they were an average age of 12 when they turned professional and were arguably the original boy band. Thousands of fans waited for the Jackson 5 wherever they went, and they had to be escorted by the police. During the height of Jackson mania, crowds would pile up on top of each other just to get a closer look. And early footage shows young girls climbing over seats to get closer while police try to control the situation. The Jackson 5 performed at the Forum in California in 1970, where they attracted 19,000 fans, and the concert grossed more than $105,000, which was a record at the time. So with an average age of 12 years old, they're selling out huge arenas and becoming a major force in entertainment. So of course, Motown, they became the main marketing focus, and the label capitalized on the group's youth appeal, licensing dozens of products, including the J5 heart logo on Johnny Jackson's drum set. So think about this. So then they had album covers, stickers, posters, coloring books, board game, Saturday morning cartoon. I mean, they had every type of media. So it's interesting because some of you may know Howard Stern, right? And Howard Stern calls himself the king of all media. No, dude. This is why we talk about Michael Jackson being, the king of pop. Well, really, he and his brothers had already been kings of every major type of media, product placement, everything that you could possibly imagine. They did that average age of 12. So, of course, with all of this, you have a limit, but very quickly. So fast forward to I'm a little kid and my grandmother's basement. And my grandmother's basement was very typical of a 1960s home. It was a fairly modest ranch, a 3-bedroom ranch, bath and a half, bathroom and a half, and a basement. Excuse me. So the placement of the house couldn't have been worse, in the fact that the front yard was basically a hill that ran all the water towards the house and foundation, which is not the best design that you can imagine. So the basement had to have sump pump and all that. So it always had this vaguely musty smell, right? And it's all the old dark wood paneling and all the built-in shelving and, the built-in bar, pool table and all that. But so I get this very visceral kind of response when I start listening to the Jackson 5 in my head, because I can just place myself down in the basement, looking through all these 45s and putting on a song like ABC. Like I can be transported there in an instant, and the smells, the sights, the sounds, I very much have this affection for that music, which would have been the music of my parents' youth. These were in many ways, just from an age, perspective. I mean, they're all the same age. And when you see people your own age having this kind of success, I think it resonates with you far more because, the Beatles would have been 10 years older than everyone else. So yes, a phenomenon. At this point, Elvis would have been 20 years older than everybody else. So yes, those are the things that they also listened to. But the Jacksons were kids. I mean, that's why it's marketable nowadays when you have young people who are, huge stars, because the youth can see themselves in these artists. So Michael is famous from childhood. So eventually, Michael says, you know what? I can't do it anymore. So whether it was the relationship with Joe, the relationship with his brothers, nevertheless, it was time for him to break away. So they debuted in 1964. So in 1975, Michael decided that he needed to go off on his own. So he leaves the band, signs his own deal, and let's see here. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I forgot about this. So in 1977, and I remember this clearly. So as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's where it is in the timeline. Michael went to New York City to star as the Scarecrow in The Wiz, a musical film directed by Sidney Lumet, alongside Diana Ross, Nipsey Russell, and Ted Ross. The film was a box office failure, despite having a score arranged by Quincy Jones, who obviously his relationship with Michael was huge. However, I will tell you, I really enjoyed The Wiz because I've mentioned on the podcast before, the Wizard of Oz, in and of itself, has a lot of scary moments, true scary moments. And I talked about, Return to Oz, which I haven't seen. I've only been told how horrific it is. And The Wiz took the elements that were already in the Frank Baum books and actually made it even more frightening and terrifying. You actually got, the crows, because this is live action. And I think that the flying monkeys that were in the original Wizard of Oz, I don't know if that was special effects or whatever it was. That it was probably, little people in costumes, but it was just really, really scary. It was really scary and a really great approach. I loved it. I loved The Wiz. I have seen it so many times. I think it's great. But that was Michael really beginning to be a star on his own, even despite the movie being, a dud. So here's what's interesting. In 1978, Jackson broke his nose during a dance routine. A rhinoplasty led to breathing difficulties that later affected his career. So a lot has been talked about Michael's appearance, right? And we'll certainly talk about that as we're going along, because with each successive project, album, film, whatever it was, you began to see these changes. And part of it is obviously his own self-image, in part due to the pressures that he felt even as a child about appearance and professionalism and being in the entertainment business. So it's interesting how the first nose surgery was due to an actual incident, a broken nose, and how this may have set him down the path of significant and severe and, quite frankly, disfiguring plastic surgery. It's really tragic. It's really tragic when you think about it. So Jackson's fifth solo album, and I didn't realize, how many records he was doing at this point, because he was still writing songs for his brothers, for the Jacksons. But his fifth solo album, Off the Wall, in 1979, established him as a solo performer and helped him move from the bubblegum pop of his youth to more complex sounds. So think about these songs. 4 top 10 entries as a solo artist. Off the Wall, She's Out of My Life, and the chart-topping singles Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You. I mean, unbelievable. Like the musicianship, the writing, the lyricism, the amazing melodies, and how we would perform all of these things while dancing at such a high level. So I'd forgotten the number of records that he was still doing as part of the Jackson 5. So he had in 1972, Got to Be There, a solo debut by Michael Jackson, 1972. 4 weeks after the Jackson 5's greatest hits, because they already had greatest hits as of 1971. I'd forgotten all about Ben. So Ben is his second studio album, also in 1972. He's still a member of the band. Music and Me, I don't recall that one as well. And I don't really know these songs particularly well. And then you have Forever Michael, which would have been the precursor, the album right before he broke. And I'm looking at all the writing credits, and really he has no writing credits on those records. However, when you get to Off the Wall, written Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, all of it being produced by Quincy Jones. So he's now really officially taking control of his career, and he is the driving force behind the songs that he's recording. So in Off the Wall, that first breakthrough record, it's notable because the cover of the album is the first since he's had that first, bit of nose work done, right? The first rhinoplasty. But he still very much looks like Michael Jackson. It's very subtle because obviously it was done as a correction to, the nose break. So, hey, look, it's Michael Jackson. Doesn't even, it raises no eyebrows. Let's put it that way. So then, of course, the album that kind of got me thinking about, doing this episode. Oh, so very quickly, it's also notable the styles are changing as well. So we're going from the 1970s, right? So a lot of young black men in the 70s, 60s, and 70s had afros. So it's the cover of Thriller that I think surprised so many people. So his hair, relaxer or whatever. It's relaxer, right? I was going to say that it was, I was thinking that there's a brand and then it escapes me. Anyway, so not the afro. And there's now more obvious changes to his face from Off the Wall. I mean, I think it's difficult to have a conversation about Michael Jackson without delving into the significant physical changes, because, when he begins to talk about things later on a little bit, when the few moments that he'd be candid and kind of open up about the things that he experienced, particularly in childhood, that's when you really do get, I guess, this picture of a truly tragic figure. Now, it will also obviously be talking about in a little bit some things that are inexcusable. They're inexcusable. And I think we're always looking for things to kind of explain away certain behaviors. So in no way, shape, or form am I defending some of the later allegations that came out. Some would say it's not allegations. Some would say that it's it's fact, it's done deal. Where there's smoke, there's fire kind of thing, and obviously lawsuits and settlements and all those kind of things. However, I'm far from granting him, clemency for the actions. However, this is a severely traumatized human being, and that's what makes it all the worse, really. Like all the things that came after, and you just wonder how much impulse control, like how he was able to function. And really, when you think about how it ended, it was an inability to function after a certain point. So, nevertheless, Thriller was released November 30th, 1982 on Epic Records, also produced by Quincy Jones, and Jackson said he wanted to create an album where every song was a killer. Like he got it. He knew. Like he saw what he was able to do as a writer and to work with someone like Quincy Jones, that he's like, I can do this. I can do this. I have the ability to create my own music. I don't need to rely on other writers. I don't need to rely on my family. So it's curious here because everyone has hindsight 2020. To a certain extent, I'm doing the same thing, right? I'm looking at it through the lens of things that I know now. Thriller foreshadows the contradictory themes of Jackson's personal life as he began using a motif of paranoia and darker themes. Not to mention the fact that Paul McCartney is on the record with The Girl Is Mine, and that was fraught with drama later on, in particular surrounding the Beatles' catalog. So Thriller became Jackson's first #1 album, where it spent a record 37 consecutive weeks at #1, from February 26, 1983 to April 14th, 1984. 7 singles were released, and they all reached the top 10, setting a record for the most top 10 singles from a singular album. I don't need to remind you, because anyone who's listening to this podcast, you know the age we're at. The Girl Is Mine, Billie Jean, Beat It, Wanna Be Startin' Something, Human Nature, PYT, and Thriller. And Beat It and Billie Jean both reached #1. So if that isn't enough to already be an icon at this point, right? Reaching the heights of his professional solo career after already having had a decade of a career with his brothers. Following Jackson's performance of Billie Jean in the Motown 25 television special, where he debuted his signature moonwalk dance, the sales of the album increased significantly, selling 1 million copies worldwide per week. Per week. So it's crazy to think that the video for Thriller was the last single released. Unbelievable. And like I said, December 2nd, 1983, and it played regularly on MTV, which also increased the sales. Worldwide, 32 million copies. Thriller remains the best-selling album of all time, with sales of 70 million copies worldwide. It is the second best album in the United States and was certified 34 times platinum by the Recording Industry Association of America. It won a record-breaking 8 Grammys at the 1984 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year, while Beat It won Record of the Year. And Jackson also won a record-breaking 8 American Music Awards in 1984. The album has been a frequent inclusion on lists of the greatest albums of all time, and in 2008 it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. In the same year, the Library of Congress added it to the National Recording Registry, of culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant recordings. I mean, it's kind of hard to dispute a single bit of that. I mean, do you really know anyone who didn't have a copy of Thriller? I mean, everyone had a copy of Thriller. Everyone. Whether you had it on vinyl, which I had, my vinyl got ruined. Don't exactly remember how, but kind of a bummer. So here, he's reaching this major, both critical and commercial success. And the period saw him become deeply unhappy. And Jackson said, "Even at home, I'm lonely. I sit in my room sometimes and cry. It's so hard to make friends. I sometimes walk around the neighborhood at night, just hoping to find someone to talk to, but I end up just coming home." There's such a desperation in that, which I think you begin to see kind of the precursor to some of the behaviors that would come later. So I didn't realize the gap in between. However, Thriller, massive thing, really that went from 1982 to 1984, like that whole cycle between, release, the singles, the music videos, the touring, the awards, and okay, gonna take a break. So Michael doesn't release another record until the follow-up to Thriller, which was 1987's Bad. So again, now you have a different look from the last album. So you're starting to see this gradual change, right? So this is where, he's in his late 20s at this point, already, iconic. And, he is looking different. His skin tone is different. There had been more work on his nose. He's growing his hair longer. So each and every record as he's going along, there's a different look. Now, this is common for artists because they don't always want to look the same. So every time they, release a new record, there'd be something subtly different about the way that they look. And I think about, in rock bands, they, different guitars. They do something different. Motley Crue, perfect example. Every record, there's a different look, there's a different theme. So that in and of itself is completely normal. It's just that Michael is also changing literally his face. That's a really crazy thing. It's a really crazy thing. And everyone's seeing it, yet at the same time, the music, his performance, his aura, it's just so massive that it overcomes all of that because he's such an amazing performer. So the album was written and recorded between 1985 and 1987, and Bad was the third and final collaboration between Jackson and Quincy Jones. Jackson notably adopted an edgy look and sound with Bad, departing from his signature groove-based style and high-pitched vocals. The album incorporates pop, rock, funk, R&B, dancehall, and hard rock styles. Now, he's already done that before, right? I mean, he really has. I mean, Beat It. He gets Eddie Van Halen. That's a rock song. It's a rock song, period. So whoever wrote this, I'm not sure I exactly agree with your synopsis. But the lyrical themes include media bias, paranoia, racial profiling, romance, self-improvement, and world peace. It sold it debuted at number one, Billboard's top pop album charts, selling over 2.25 million copies in the first week in the United States. 9 songs from the album were released as official singles, and one as a promotional single. 7 charted in the top 20 of the US, including a record-breaking 5 number ones. I Just Can't Stop Loving You, Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, and Dirty Diana. And the other ones that didn't quite make it, Speed Demon, Leave Me Alone, and Smooth Criminal. Oh, I'm sorry. The album was also promoted with the film Moonwalker, which included the music videos of songs from the album. Speed Demon, Leave Me Alone, Man in the Mirror, and Smooth Criminal. Smooth Criminal, that is a jam. That is a jam. Such a good song. And I love Alien Ant Farm's version of it. It's so great. So I think that, he did a song with Slash on this. So again, having a great guitar player. 11 times platinum at the time. I think it's sold more since then. And then, let's see here. Oh, great reviews and huge commercial success across the board. And some have said that this is the defining sound of late 80s pop, along with Madonna's Like a Prayer and Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation 1814. I mean, again, hard to really debate that. Hard to debate that. So to me, this is probably the last album for me where I was, a Michael Jackson fan, Not that I didn't continue to appreciate, right? Completely appreciate his whole body of work. But that was the last time I was like, yeah, Michael. 1987, I'm in 8th grade. I'm starting to get more into, the rock and metal and all that kind of stuff. And Michael's next record wasn't until 1991, which was Dangerous. Now, Dangerous came out November 26, 1991, more than 4 years. So his gap between records is actually fairly large. And Dangerous is widely described as an R&B album in pop music with elements of New Jack Swing, a growing genre at the time, with elements of industrial, funk, hip-hop, electronic, gospel, classical, and rock. 12 of the album's 14 songs were written or co-written by Jackson, discussing topics like racism, poverty, and romance. Oh, this is when he jammed with Slash. That was on Black and White, which was a #1 single. The album produced 4 singles that reached the top 10. Remember the Time, In the Closet, Will You Be There, and the #1 Black or White. And the Dangerous World Tour grossed $100 million, equivalent to $177 million adjusted for inflation, making it one of the highest grossing tours of the 90s, with the album being certified 8 times platinum, with great reviews and all that. And then, like I said, I didn't really listen to it. It was cool that Slash was on there. History, Past, Present, and Future, Book 1, the 9th album. I can't say I remember anything off of this record, to be honest, which is crazy because, he's still touring like crazy. Oh, interesting. You Are Not Alone was the first song in history. Oh, I know that one. You Are Not Alone. First song in history, debut at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was Jackson's final #1 single on the charts. Though the album received generally positive reviews, the lyrics for They Don't Care About Us drew accusations of anti-Semitism. Jackson said they had been misinterpreted and replaced them on later pressings of the album. No clue. For all of the scandals that he'd been involved with, I had never heard that before. Let's see here. Controversy. Oh, I remember the line. I'm not even going to say it. I remember it, though. But then he says in the same song, right? I am the Jew, I am the black man, I am the white man, I am not the one who was attacking. Oh, that's him defending it. So he is a Jew, he is a black man, he is a white man. Okay. But he was angry and outraged that he could be so misinterpreted. Um, I'm waiting for Kanye to say the same. I'm misinterpreted. Um, so then the final studio album by Michael Jackson is Invincible, released in 2001, that features appearances from Carlos Santana, the Notorious B.I.G., and Slash once again. It incorporates R&B, pop, and soul, and similarly to Jackson's previous material, the album explores themes such as love, romance, isolation, media criticism, and social issues. Lead single, You Rock My World, top 10. Two more singles, Cry and Butterflies, and a promotional single, Speechless, with mixed reviews, and became Jackson's most critically derided albums. However, retrospectives have been more positive since then. Don't have much to say about this album. But even then, I mean, it sold a ton of records. I mean, it was still multi-platinum because it's Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson could sell constantly, no matter really what the material was. So this is the part of the pod where we've just gone through the albums, right? So I mentioned that 1991 was that Dangerous record, which would have been the last time I really listened to it. So in 1993, so it's not like we can avoid it, right? We have to talk about it. In 1993, Jackson was accused of sexual abuse by a 13-year-old boy, Jordan Chandler, and his father, Evan Chandler. Jordan said he and Jackson had engaged in acts of kissing, masturbation, and oral sex. While Jordan's mother initially told police she did not believe Jackson had molested him, her position wavered after a few days. So it gets worse when you consider that, by his own admission, is that Michael was taking significant painkillers for reconstructive scalp surgery because of the accident that he had in 1984, where his hair caught on fire during the preparations for the music video, I think, recording for the Victory Tour with the Jacksons. And that at this time he had become dependent on painkillers, coupled with the stress of the sexual abuse allegations. So he'd canceled the remainder of the Dangerous tour, and oddly enough, in all of this time, do you remember this? The King of Pop married the daughter of the King of Rock and Roll, Lisa Marie Presley. He proposed for her over the phone, by the way, and they married in La Vega, Dominican Republic in May 1994. I don't know how that happened. I don't know the situation. I think that sometimes, and again, I'm just speculating, hey, we have a really negative story. Let's do something out of the box. I know, I'll marry Lisa Marie Presley. I don't know. I can't say for certain. What are the motivations of very famous and very powerful, very rich, and very strange people? I don't know. So he was married again. So let's see. When did the marriage dissolved in 95? So that didn't last long. And then he got married again to, is that Debbie Rowe? Yeah. So during the tour in Sydney, Australia, Jackson married Debbie Rowe, a dermatology assistant who was 6 months pregnant with his child. So, Michael Joseph Jackson was born on February 13th, 1997. His sister Paris Michael Catherine Jackson was born April 3rd, 1998. And where's Blanket? Yes, because his youngest is named Blanket. That's not his official name. Let's see. Children. see. Paris, Michael, and it just says blanket. It just says blanket. I don't know. I'm sure I could look it up. Oh yeah. So the boys are named Michael Joseph Jackson Jr., nicknamed Prince, and one younger half brother, Prince Michael Jackson II. That's blanket. I don't know. It's all very, very confusing, and this is where it just got really weird because if you remember, I'm kind of jumping over all over the place at this point, but that's when he dangled, I think it was blanket, over the railing of his hotel room because the crowd wanted to see the baby, right? So, yeah. Then about a decade later, you had the second child abuse allegation, but ultimately he was acquitted. They said there was a lack of evidence. But after the trial, the second trial, he became more and more reclusive. So the final years of Michael, I mean, that's such a ominous way of kind of putting it, but it really is the truth. He had at this point significant financial issues. He was not thrifty, and he didn't necessarily have the right kind of assets. In April 2006, Jackson agreed to use a piece of his ATV catalog stake, then worth about $1 billion, as collateral against his $270 million worth of loans from Bank of America. Bank of America sold those loans to Fortress Investments, an investment company that buys distressed loans. And as part of the agreement, Fortress Investments provided Jackson a new loan of $300 million with reduced interest payments, equivalent to $403 and change in 2021. Sony Music would have the option to buy half of his stake, or about 25% of the catalog, at a set price. So Michael had to then, his financial managers urged him to shed part of his stake to avoid bankruptcy. The main house at Neverland Ranch, we didn't even talk about Neverland Ranch, with its own, roller coaster, and of course the exotic animals, like all of that. But the main house at Neverland Ranch was closed as a cost-cutting measure, while Jackson lived in Bahrain at the hospitality of Sheikh Abdullah, the ruler's son. At least 30 of Jackson's employees had not been paid on time and were owed $306,000 in back wages. Jackson was then ordered to pay $100,000 in penalties. So really, you have a situation where you're seeing the spiral and decline of a human being who has been in the public eye his whole life, has never had any normalcy, like not even for a moment, maybe when he was really, really little, before they began performing. All of this has added up. The painkiller addiction, from admittedly some very gruesome accidents, also significant reconstruction of his face, not by accident, but by design. And you have these amazing, it's just a significant level of stress and people who are reliant upon you and dependent upon you, not just as kids, but all these people who work for the Michael Jackson organization, which is why so many bands at this point and artists have incorporated the band. Journey's a perfect example. They have a corporation. They have a board. They do that purposely so that they're actually protecting the interests of everyone involved. Because every time a band goes on tour, there are so many people that are involved in that process. Those are employees, and they're not even full-time employees, because a tour could last, 1 to 2 years, but then all of those people then have to find other tours. So oftentimes they work for very specific artists who kind of have a rotation as far as when they tour. So again, that album touring cycle is very important for the music industry because people who are riggers and sound people and just everything that goes along with a tour, they rely on the artists to be successful. So Michael was really actually responsible for the livelihoods of hundreds of people. So on June 25th, 2009, while getting ready for what would be his final performances, Michael Jackson died of acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication at his home in North Carolwood Drive in the Holmby Hills neighborhood in Los Angeles, California. His physician, Conrad Murray, said that he found Jackson in his room not breathing and with a weak pulse and administered CPR to no avail. However, the coroner concluded that Jackson's death was a homicide. Jackson had been administered propofol, an anti-anxiety benzodiazepine, lorazepam, and midazolam by the doctor. So Dr. Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in November of 2011 and was released after 2 years. Now, one of the things that the doctor said, and I think the reason that it ended up being downgraded to involuntary manslaughter, is that because of Michael's drug abuse, he had a significantly higher tolerance for the drugs that were in his system. And, it says here, he administered flumazenil, a drug used to counteract sedative overdose, which he kept on hand. So it was known that the amount of drugs that Michael was using on a regular basis was significant enough to potentially put him in an overdose situation. So I think whenever I hear about the story of Michael Jackson in his final days, I think it's actually it kind of goes along with the physical changes. So it is possible. I believe Michael said that he had vitiligo, right, which affected his skin. So therefore, he used various different techniques to blend out his skin so he wouldn't be patchy. Because with vitiligo, you could have like large sections that are white versus the rest of, because I guess the melanin actually it goes away. So you have all these different skin tones. So obviously he is a huge performer. He did this process to balance it all out. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But when you look at it from all of the significant changes to his face, as you probably heard, at one point, a section of his nose fell off. You could see that the tip of his nose appeared to be gangrenous. That's awful. Because to me, it seems that no one ever told him no. Because he was so wealthy. He was so famous. But I'm sure there was a certain cachet to saying, I'm Michael Jackson's physician. I'm Michael Jackson's plastic surgeon. I'm his doctor. I'm his whatever. So instead of going ahead and getting him help, you have a doctor who's basically one of these, these pain doctors who's just going ahead and writing the scripts. How about getting him help? Now you can say, well, he has to want to get the help. for all of his success, for all of his ability, he's proven time and time again to be very, very weak. This is not a person who, how do I put it? I think he was very easily swayed, but also gave in to these impulses. So, drug addiction, plastic surgery addiction, maybe a really extreme form of dysmorphia that went along with it, allegations of sexual abuse. All of those things strike me as being very much related. It's impulses, it's addiction, it's the inability to control these things because no one's telling you no. And he didn't have, I think, never met the man. This is all just from what you read and what you've heard over all these years. He didn't have this fortitude with things in his personal life. Exceptionally strong and powerful, and took ownership of his career. Those are really powerful things that he did for himself. He had to leave the family unit for his own health, and he did that successfully. And I'm going to control my career. I'm going to write my music. I'm going to do that. That shows this confidence in his ability. And to see where it led is just so tragic. I know I said that a number of times. Just every record. And you saw the changes in him. When you had all these allegations. And I think most people kind of believed it right away because of everything that we'd heard. But here's the last piece from the coroner's report, which is why it was labeled as a homicide. But wow. The autopsy report revealed that Jackson was otherwise healthy for his age and that his heart was strong. His most significant health problem was that his lungs were chronically inflamed, but this did not contribute to his death. His other major organs were normal, and he had no atherosclerosis except for slight plaque accumulation in the arteries in his legs. And the Associated Press stated that his weight was in the acceptable range. So the only thing that you come back to is you have combined drug intoxication with anesthetic propofol, anxiolytic lorazepam, and less significant drugs, including midazolam, diazepam, lidocaine, ephedrine, and multiple others. I mean, just awful. And this is under the care of a doctor who just kept giving him more and more and more. So Michael Jackson's manager or video producer, Mark Schaeffel, Jackson's former video producer, said that the singer used the propofol, alprazolam, sertraline, an antidepressant, omeprazole, hydrocodone, paroxetine, carisoprodol, and hydromorphone. And that they found several other drugs in his home, and that he was taking up to 40 alprazolam pills a night. I mean, this guy, oh my gosh, he suspected that one of the major factors causing some symptoms was the excessive use of steroids or other skin whitening medications, plus stimulants to keep him going from demanding performances. Good grief. The DEA focused on at least 5 doctors who prescribed drugs to Jackson, trying to determine whether they had a face-to-face relationship with him or whether they had made legally required diagnoses. At least 9 doctors were under investigation, and the police wanted to question an additional 30 doctors, nurses, and pharmacists because people were just giving him stuff. Pharmacist occasionally had given Jackson pethidine to sedate him, but administered nothing stronger, and that he turned his records over for medical examination. Oh boy. So Michael Jackson debuts in the public eye in 1964, and they are a hit right out of the gate. Grows into his teens and 20s as a massive superstar, faced with terrible circumstances behind the scenes. Goes on to become the top-selling solo artist ever, to becoming truly a worldwide icon while still alive. It's not just the, looking back. They talk about all the great artists, they're never appreciated until after they're gone. This guy was absolutely celebrated during his lifetime, which I'm sure led to so much of the pressure. He married a Presley. He had these 3 kids, which everyone speculates whether they're his or they weren't. But at the end of the day, this was a tremendously talented and exceptionally broken individual. And it demonstrates how, despite success and fame and all the things that go along with it, this guy was stuck being a little kid who was never able to actually grow normally. Stunted growth mentally and emotionally, to the point where he was dependent on all these drugs, who probably got himself into situations, particularly surrounding himself with children, which may have been completely benign. It may have been because of his stunted growth that he related better to children. But to die at the age of 50 years old. I mean, I'm 48. I'm very, very close to that. To think that he's this worldwide star and gone at 50. I can't imagine where he'd be now. I mean, to think that's 2009. Was that 13 years ago? Something like that. Anyway, I had to do this episode on Michael Jackson. He popped to the forefront of my mind, an icon of early MTV, a innovator in dance, in music, in video, in concert performance, in touring, exploring other media, alternate media. At one point, before he lost, so much of his money, he was, investing and buying musical catalogs like the Beatles, for example, knowing the power of publishing. He had so much going for him. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like Michael Jackson was able to see all that he had going for him. He was just a traumatized little kid. Anyway, Michael, I hope you have found peace in death that you could not be granted in life. That is somewhat of a quote from Dusk Till Dawn, written by Quentin Tarantino, directed by Robert Rodriguez. George Clooney's first real starring role. But anyway. And I hope that his kids are doing okay. It seems like, Paris has done a couple of interesting things. Oddly enough, she was in a Steel Panther video. I hope they're doing okay. And I hope the family, they're human beings at the end of the day, regardless of the fact that they're famous or they're rich or they're wealthy or they have power. They're human beings. I think, unless you get into conspiracy theories. I don't know, maybe they're lizards or something. But that's my little dive into the king of pop, Michael Joseph Jackson, and may he rest in peace. Just really too bad. Really, really too bad. I just remember being such a huge fan. Like, this was the guy. I listened to that Thriller record over and over and over again. And like he said, every song was absolutely a killer. So that brings this episode to a close. So tell me, what are your recollections of Michael Jackson? Icon? Hero? Villain? Please let me know. How can you let me know? Well, you can follow me at StuckPodX on Twitter, Instagram, and over at the YouTube channel. You can go over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. Most importantly, please leave 5-star reviews, leave comments, write comments in any of the social media platforms, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You gotta subscribe. It helps the show to grow. And I'd really appreciate if you can go ahead and if you're enjoying the show, let some people know about it. So until next time, later, slackers.